Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Percy Pintado wash processed Peru from September Coffee Company. And there's the bag right there. And September, based out of Ottawa, Ontario. And before we start discussing this coffee, I wanted to talk about September's new bag design, as this is our first review of their coffee since they added these new bags. And if I'm being completely honest, this is not just one of my favorite redesigns, but one of my favorite bag designs in general, as I absolutely love the clean and simplistic look of these bags. So I think that September got this one spot on. But they are a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel on multiple occasions, including a recent review of the Las Perlitas, a wash processed Colombian coffee. And in that video, I had mentioned that we actually did reach out to Kyle asking for some suggestions, and this is another coffee that he had suggested to us. So it's not the coffee that initially caught our eye, but it is another coffee that caught our interest and attention, in addition to Kyle recommending it to us, as it's a coffee that I probably would have purchased even if it hadn't been recommended to us, as it is a Peruvian geisha, and we have had some very good success with Peruvian geishas on this channel in the past. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing this one as well. This right here is day 39. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex as well, which does indicate a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee. So as we mentioned in the past, September definitely roasts on the lighter side of things relative to a lot of Canadian coffee roasters. This one did feel lighter than the Las Perlitas. It's actually one of the lighter roasted coffees that we've had from September in general. So this one I could definitely say is on the light side of things by most standards and metrics. Pretty light, that is to say. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we ran it through the V60, and the cup left a very lasting first impression, as it was super floral right off brew, with the listed jasmine feeling very apt, as the florality skewed very much in that jasmine sense. There is some additional citric attributes giving the cup plenty of the anticipated geisha characteristics. Very clean, sweet, and floral, lending itself to a very nice start. A lot of what we might have expected from this coffee. We continue on to day 17 as we opted for the Chemex, and it's another nice day of this one, as it felt best off brew through this brew method, offering much more of the geisha versus origin characteristics, as it's a little bit lighter bodied. So with a Peruvian coffee, you might expect maybe some of the more classic South American characteristics, maybe a little bit more body, maybe a little bit more chocolate, maybe some caramel or nuttiness to it, but that's not necessarily the case. The geisha really seemed to play the bigger role in this one, as it was much more on the floral, clean, sweet side of things. Pretty straightforward so far though. We continue on to day 20 as we opted for the April brewer, and this is the first time the cup felt notably different, as it was offering more sweetness than the previous days, as it appears to be opening up a little bit. There's a little bit more of a candied citric component, with the bergamot note feeling the most apt it had been up to this point. In addition to that, there is a slightly lingering bitterness to it, but an overall better day, as I enjoyed the additional sweetness of this one. Continue on to day 23 as we opted for the V60 with higher temperatures and a more fine grind, and this was a pretty solid cup yet again, as it was offering a very nice level of sweetness, but a much more lively citric and floral components to it as well. In a weird way, the cup felt slightly reminiscent of what I would describe as being Rockstar energy drink, as it had that slightly grapefruit bubblegum-like taste to it, with a slight herbality and bitterness. So this was a very nice day, but I was continuing to feel that this coffee was very intense, and that's been a theme of the last couple of coffees we've talked about with September, is that they do a very good job of getting some great intensity from their coffees, which for me is actually a positive. I think if I'm trying to tone down your wash processed coffees, then I actually think you're trending in the right direction, at least in terms of the intensity. We continue on to day 26 as we opted for the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it continues to offer plenty of the intensity, as the sweetness continues to remain high, with plenty of the more herbal, sugary soda-like attributes to the cup. Florals remain very high too, as the listed jasmine continues to feel like a very apt and prominent note within this coffee. Long-lasting, sweeter citric attributes to the cup, pretty lively, and it's been pretty consistent as well. So a lot of the citric components we haven't felt the need to necessarily go overly in depth on, mostly because it's just been a sweeter citrus in general. And the bergamot note that they have listed on here, I think that goes in line with a lot of the herbal components to it. That grapefruit, once again, reminiscent of that kind of energy drink like attributes to it as well. So this one's been a fun one because it just offered a lot of depth and a lot of different components within it. Day 29 went back through our standard recipe with the V60, and it had some mixed results as it definitely toned down a lot of the liveliness and herbality while providing a little bit more definition. Still a mostly citric forward cup with plenty of definition in terms of the sugary sweetness, and the finish slightly reminiscent of what I've described as this day being marshmallows. In addition to that, there's that energy drink like sweetness as well. So for the most part, it's better. I felt like this coffee, maybe with some higher extraction, was pushing it a little bit too much in terms of the citric components to it, in terms of the brightnesses. It just really seemed to dominate some of the more, I would say, subtle characteristics of it, which were also pretty intense. So very interesting coffee. We continue on to day 32 as we opted for the Chemex with our standard recipe. And this was my favorite of the coffee, and it's why we stuck with this recipe, as it was back to its best by toning down so much of the intense components to it. The sweetness and the citrus were present yet again, as there were some softer dark berries, and this time I could also feel some peachiness, so we're just getting much more from this coffee as well, but predominantly dominated by the herbal citrus components. So once again, that listed bergamot felt like a very good fitting characteristic for this one. Day 35, final notes we have, ran it through the Chemex one more time. Another nice day with these sweeter soda-like attributes. Plenty of the citrus bubblegum-like sweetness, though I ran out of space. So that's all we have for those day 35 notes. Let's go ahead and transition on over to the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. So I think maybe going into this, there was a question as to whether or not this one would score the level 5, and I think maybe were there a little bit more definition to a lot of the citric components to it than I could have possibly justified that level 5 mark. But I think this one kind of touched on a number of different citric attributes, as well as some floral components and kind of that herbal aspect that also gave it a little bit of character. So I think the only reason why the cleanliness did not score that level 5 was because, weirdly enough, it had so much in it that I was actually going against the overall clarity for this one, because you couldn't necessarily pinpoint all of the flavors in a very well-defined manner, mostly because there were just so many that were fleeting from time to time. So I had mentioned an abundance of things, stuff like marshmallow, sugary soda, herbality, florality, the bergamot-like attribute, different sorts of citrus components. So all of those things, you're like, there's so much in this coffee, and for that reason, I think it's kind of hurting the overall clarity of it, scoring that level 4. But it's still a very clean coffee. Definitely on the higher side of the level 4, and I definitely think that that has a lot to do with the fact that it is a geisha coffee. Finish, level 4. Interestingly, once again, the higher side of level 4, and that's been a theme with the last couple of coffees we've discussed from September, as this one also had that kind of lingering herbal component to it as well. And it kind of gave this one that entire soda-like feel to it, and that made for a very interesting drink throughout. So interesting in that regard. We continue on to the sweetness level 4. This one also on the slightly higher side of the level 4, and going into some of September's coffees, since they made the transition to lowering, I don't know if I necessarily would have thought that they would have offered such sweet coffees, but the coffees that they have offered, especially the ones we've discussed, have been on the sweeter side of things, and this one's no exception, as I could not help but feel sugariness, marshmallow, like a bunch of just sweeter attributes that were also present within this one. I think on paper, it's not necessarily something I would expect from a Peruvian geisha roasted in lowering, but nonetheless, very sweet coffee, so credit to them on that. We continue on to the acidity level 4, and that's another thing that I had to kind of work to tone down because there was quite a bit of brightness to this one. I made this one side by side with the Las Perlitas, so on those days I was saying, okay, they're both pretty bright, so I guess they're both scoring that level 4, and this one was no exception. Level 4 definitely fitting for this coffee. Florality level 4. Jasmine felt apt, plenty of it. Very prominent, very pronounced. The entirety of this coffee seemed to offer it. It was a consistent note through it. I don't necessarily think I have too much to add to that. Citrus fruit, level 4. And then the citric quality within this one, the bergamot-like component within this coffee. Yes, definitely one of the more pronounced characteristics to it. In addition to that, just sweeter citrus in general. So definitely felt like that scoring the level 4 was always something that was going to be expected within this coffee. Continue on, we have a couple of level 3s. We will start with the berry fruit level 3. I'd mentioned some slightly darker berry attributes in this one. I could say something along the lines of a grape, or even a little bit more of like a blueberry-like component to it, though those were a little bit more soft, and that's why they're scoring there at that level 3 mark. And then we also see the stone fruit at level 3. And I've said in the past that typically when I get those grapefruit-like qualities, I can kind of see also peachiness to them, as I think maybe what they're going for is a little bit more of a less bitter, the kind of ripened grapefruit component to it, which at times I think it's a little, I don't want to say difficult, but similar to a little bit more of a fresh peachiness to it. And so for that reason, it did score that level 3. And that's a very nice positive to this coffee as well. One of my more enjoyable parts of this one too. Last thing at that level 3 is the savoriness, and as I kind of mentioned, has that herbal savoriness to it, and that's something that in the past I have experienced a little bit with the Peruvian geishas in general, so maybe it's a theme and an expectation I should have had going into this one, but that ever so slight herbal components once again did give it that kind of soda, energy drink-like feel to it. And then the final thing worth discussing is the body at a level 2, and that's much more in line with the expectations. As I said in the start, that this one skewed much more in the direction of the varietal as opposed to the origin, as Peruvian coffees typically tend to have a little bit more body, but this one right here, being a geisha, especially brewed to the Chemex, was always expected to have maybe a little less body, and it definitely did relative to some of the other ones we're going to be discussing. But as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I do have to start with this. I'm not entirely sure whether or not I'm going to be releasing this review first or the Mario Asorsa, the wash process Peruvian geisha from Say first, but it will be interesting to kind of compare and contrast these two coffees side by side because they did offer some pretty similar characteristics. This is the first one I'm recording, but I don't know if it's the first one I'm going to be releasing, so I'll probably discuss it more in the Say review, and I still might not know which one's going to be released first. Nonetheless, I enjoyed both of them a lot, and I think it's because they turned out to be a little bit more sweeter than I was expecting, but they offered a lot of similar characteristics to them. And for two roasters that I feel like are both some of the best for the United States and Canada, then I feel like it was a very enjoyable comparison to kind of compare two heavyweights, and I'm already putting September in the heavyweight category, side by side to see which one I enjoyed more. And it's very close, and I think I'd have to honestly brew the coffees together side by side and try them side by side to decide, because that's just how close they were. This one was enjoyable. I liked a lot of the attributes in this one. I really enjoy when coffees have this much to them, and while it may have been at the detriment of the overall clarity, it was made up for by the fact that it had great sweetness, great florality, as well as fruit characteristics to it. So everything that I'm looking for in the coffee, because it still offered that higher than average, higher than expected clarity. Having those things score on the higher side of level 4 is going to be a very good start for this coffee. And I do have to say that this one lived up to the hype, and it continues to show and demonstrate why I think September is headed in the right direction. Everything I've said about September and this coffee in this video has definitely lent itself towards being one of my favorite coffee roasters in the world. So keep up the good work, September. I think that this one was a very good representation of a Peruvian geisha. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you really like those kind of herbal soda-like coffees, then this one's a wonderful fit for that, as it offered that in a very sweet sense with still plenty of brightness. There's so much in this coffee. Great clarity, great sweetness, great brightness, herbality, fruit components, depth, complexity. So much that can be enjoyed from this one start to finish, and I do enjoy and appreciate the lighter profile of September's coffees in general. So many positives to take away. If all of those things are things you're looking for, then I feel like this one is going to be a pretty good fit, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Percy Pintado Wash Process Peru from September Coffee Company. Thank you for watching.